Democracy cannot meaningfully function without an informed citizenry. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation, coming to you live and direct from Stein Studios here in Ratmalana. Today's topic of discussion is the current state of affairs here in Sri Lanka and the people's right to know. It is no surprise that Sri Lanka's wars are far from over. However, the current government seems to be bringing in very questionable legislation every now and then to stifle the people's right to expression and also the media's freedom to broadcast and to disseminate information. To talk about this and much more, we have a very eminent panel of guests, as we always do. Tonight we have on our show Dr. Jaihar, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka; Dr. Jayantha Bandara, General Secretary, All Ceylon Medical Officers Association; Attorney Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Centre for Policy Alternatives; and Lasil De Silva, former Director, Administration of Parliament. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on our show this evening. Let's get the ball rolling with Dr. Jaihar. Dr. Pereira, we saw in recent months how the government tried to bring in certain pieces of legislation to stifle the media and also the people's right to information. This was brought in the form of the Broadcasting Authority Bill and also the anti-terrorism bill that has now taken a back seat for the time being. But for your opening remarks, my question to you is there true democracy in Sri Lanka, and what seems to be the government's trajectory by following these sorts of methods?
Well, fortunately, the government has not gone ahead with either the anti-terrorism law or the broadcasting law. And that is because there has been a lot of protest from civil society groups, by the media. I've seen the media very critical of this government, and also the international community. The international community also has been putting pressure, and the fact that Sri Lanka was aiming to get the EU's GSP Plus, I think also induced the government to restrain itself and not force this legislation through. Now the fact that civil society, that people's opinion, people's pressure was able to stop the government from doing something that it seemed to want to do is a sign of democracy, that the people's will prevailed in that case. However, we have to also keep in mind that the government is, in a way, has been defying the law itself in terms of where elections are concerned, the local government elections, for instance. I think it is very distressing, it's shocking, in fact, that the government should just postpone those elections and offer very shallow reasons for not holding them, and going against the law, because it's not as if local government elections have not been postponed in the past. The provincial council elections have been postponed for now 5 years, but at least there was some law that the government was able to use in those cases. In this case, it has not been able to use any law to delay the local government elections. So I would say that democracy is threatened in our country. On the other hand, the fact that we are able to talk like this, talk freely like this, is a sign that it is still alive, and we should also be happy about that. Because when we look at other countries in the region, there are more severe controls placed on say, civil society, on NGOs in our very neighborhood. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh have more severe controls on NGOs and their freedom and their ability to raise foreign funding. Here we still have that, so we have to be grateful for that. But it's certainly far from ideal situation in our country, and at the moment it looks as if things are it's on a negative trend, the democracy in our country.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaihar Pereira. I now move my attention to Dr. Jayantha Bandara, General Secretary, All Ceylon Medical Officers Association. Doctor, you are here on our show against the backdrop where the Health Ministry has issued a circular saying that disciplinary action will be taken against any official that provides information to the media without the consent of department heads. I want to pick your brain on this. What is your opinion on this matter?
Actually, I would like to focus on health crisis. This health crisis is now worsening day by day because we have no proper leadership to conduct the health system, and we have no enough funds, and we have no enough resources. There are a lot of shortages, human resources and other resources like drugs, devices, and everything. We are in the health sector workers and the patients also in a huge unrest. Then there are a lot of issues. These issues are coming out. Then we have to talk as a trade union leaders. Not only trade union leaders, anybody can talk. You have to talk about these issues. Then health ministers and the government, they have no answers these issues. We have shown all the issues to the government. We have asked, we have written, we gave the written request, but no answers. Then they have planned to suppress the leaders who are talking about these issues. That's a problem. But in this particular circular is not a new one. According to the 35 years old E-code, it was there. This is not a new one. But as a trade union leaders and as people of the country, we have a right to talk. We have right. This is a democratic country. These all things, all regulations and laws should be changed now. This is to meet the new reality. We have to fight against these suppressions, and we are talking about these issues not to focus some minister or somebody. We are talking about this public interest and our trade interest. That's why we are talking about these issues, not to harass somebody. They are thinking, when we are talking, they are thinking we are going to harass them or whatever. But our real interest is to address the public issues, for the public interest. This is the problem, but according to this circular, they have not mentioned about the trade union leaders. And we have right. Still, we have right. We don't stop our duty, our talking. They can't shut up our mouth.
Yes.
We'll be fight
to provide accurate information to the public. Thank you very much, Dr. Jayantha Bandara. We will delve deeper into the medical crisis in Sri Lanka because that is also a topic that has gained the spotlight here in Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Attorney Bhavani Fonseca, who is no stranger to Face the Nation. Bhavani, I want to ask you, let's talk about the post-Aragalaya era. During the Aragalaya, we saw mass protests erupting from well over the country, across the country. But following Ranil Wickremesinghe's appointment as the president, the government and the political authority has cracked down very hard on protests. Even two people walking on the road with a placard is harassed by the police and they are asked to not protest and stop the protest. How long do you think the government plans on suppressing the people of Sri Lanka this way?
First of all, thank you for having me. I don't know how long the government is going to use repressive tactics, but I don't think that's a new trend. We've seen that over the decades under successive governments. I think we need to be very clear that this is not something just happening under Ranil Wickremesinghe's government. So that needs to be very clearly set out. What's quite remarkable now is last year, despite the repression, people just came out to the streets and didn't go home, didn't want to just take a back seat.
Yes.
And that showed that there was a particular kind of activism awakening among the citizen. Now, that I suspect jolted some in government, some in the security sector, some in elite circles that felt that their power, their control was directly threatened by the people. And that resulted in different tactics being used, different laws. We saw emergency being imposed 3 times last year. We saw the PTA being used to arrest protesters. And even this year, as you said, there's been several ways of trying to suppress. That said, people are continuously protesting. Every day there's a protest, which shows that people are also not going to take it quietly. They're going to push back, they're going to fight for their democratic rights. And what I think Daragalia showed was that that space is there for people to express in democratic means, not violent means, democratic means. And I think going back to the question you posed to Jaihar, there is a fragile democracy in Sri Lanka. It's under intense stress, I think, by the executive arm of the government, but it's still there. The fact we can have this conversation, we can debate, some of us go to court to challenge these things is because there is space. Now, what is quite interesting to see is this year alone, the government tried to bring several laws. There was vigorous debate, pushback, but the fact that they are churning these things out, from the ATA to the Broadcasting Authority Bill, now to this particular circular, is the fact that there seems to be a fear among the government or some in government that people might keep pushing back, keep challenging, keep asking difficult questions. So I just want to also say the ATA, for example, had very broad, draconian pieces of clauses, which, if it was implemented, would have shut down dissent entirely. The Broadcasting Authority, if it became law, would have shut down possibly particular media entities, possibly your media entity. So that's a very clear sign the government is scared, is worried, and will use any means to stop any kind of criticism. So I think these are worrying signs. But the positive note is, I think recent times have shown that people are also not just going to sit back and take it. They will push back, they will challenge, they will scrutinize. So I think there is a positive and a negative, but these are again not new trends.
All right. Thank you, Bhavani. I now move my attention to Nasil De Silva, former Director, Administration of Parliament. Mr. De Silva, since you have been in Parliament and also well versed in the affairs of Parliament, I want to ask you this question because post Daragalia, like I spoke with Bhavani, all of the members in Parliament, or most of the members in Parliament, were present at sittings. But now we see that trend cooling down, and parliamentarians, policymakers seem to be taking things for granted once more. For example, last week when the central bank bill was passed, 133 parliamentarians were not in the chamber, and due to lack of quorum, the bell had to be rung twice. That is such a shameful state of affairs for the legislature of the country and one of the governing pillars. So what is your opinion on this?
I think a very good question. I brought a few papers also just to say in case, if there's something relevant. Now, when you have to talk about Parliament, that is the August Assembly, they say. Actually, the highest body when it comes to lawmaking. And they are supposed to do it well. So if they are not represented there, and if the laws can be passed with the minimal number of whatever, right, they might even follow the process, first reading, second reading, third reading, and all that. That doesn't mean the law is going to be perfect for that matter. Because, now see, I wrote an article in 2016, legitimizing parliamentary process a top priority. Turning parliament upside down is a must, right? Now, I have started this way. Parliament is a representative democracy. According to George Stuart Mill in 1862, it should act as the eyes, ears, and the voice of the people.
Right.
The elected representatives are expected to watch and control the government. They should throw light on the duties they perform as elected representatives and censure them if found suitable. Now, Hannah Pitkin, a professor, she had said it's a contract, like, you know, it's an obligation. And the deputy speaker in Singapore had said it's simply not a job, it's more than that. Unfortunate situation is our politicians do not seem to understand the responsibility. There's a social contract, right? So quite a lot of them had written pages, you know, books and all that about this social contract. Now, all what they do is something totally not in keeping even with the provisions of the Constitution, right? The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? There are certain rights. They have privileges. They have been given all the privileges to enact laws, and you can't take them to courts. But all those rights have been assigned to them in keeping with the Westminster system to enact good, strong laws. And those laws should be able to say, if it comes to a question of thieves in the country, say politicians are rogues, right? They have enacted laws, but all those laws are not effectively doing the job. So your question was whether the Parliament does the role. Parliament has a number of things, not only legislation, it also has a job to do the oversight. That means, you know, whether the laws are effectively being enforced, right? So if it is not being enforced, what happens is a situation like this. Actually, poor masses, you know, in this country, they pay taxes even for their day-to-day food. Actually, the collection of tax is like, I mean, it's murderous, I would say. People can't afford to pay that. So when it comes to a situation where people are also unable to pay the taxes, right? They are duty bound to look into all that, and then if possible find remedial measures. How to sort of grant relief, how to give them opportunity. Now you're a young man. I joined Parliament at the age of 24 in 1977. The caliber of men I saw in the 70s was quite different. It's a world of difference, right? They were people who were very responsible. Now people like Lalita Dulat Budali, for that matter even Premadasa, you know, I would say they were dedicated parliamentarians. You know, they have different shortcomings, but we know they did a job better. Look at garments industry. It was Premadasa who initiated. We were the first in Asia to start garment, right? Now it has gone even to Bangladesh. Bangladesh started garments, or at least they got independence in 1971. All what I remember, you know, they had only $17 when they got independence, basically. That was in the Pakistan airline account, $17. They had to go through a lot of problems, and they have ultimately even overtaken us. Why? They are committed, honest, dedicated, hard-working leaders, right? Unfortunately, in Parliament, we don't see that kind of leader. They are sometimes sleeping, snoring. I remember even after these elections, Gotabaya was making his speech in Parliament, addressing the nation. Nimal Siripala was fast asleep. If I was whatever, I would have taken disciplinary action or whatever, because that kind of people should not be tolerated in Parliament. Go even further, right? Can you talk about, say, corruption, maladministration, abuse of power? A man who brought gold, a member of Parliament.
Yes.
Disgraceful, right? Fines the 75 lakhs. I mean, where do you have such a lot of money? Do you have all that in your current account or bank or wherever at home? This is the country. Actually, that's what I want to say. Your future is definitely in danger, because even at this stage, the parliamentarians have not addressed. They are not talking about the economic crisis in Parliament. They are not talking about basically debt, what is this restructuring or whatever in that sense. Nobody knows. And our problem is they are resorting to all kinds of, may I say, I'm sorry I had to say that, deals. If I say, I know what is this CTB, right? I had to go for a funeral today. I couldn't afford to go by bus, go in my car. It has come to that level. Imagine in my old age now, I would have preferred to go about 40 miles, in the car. That's what I would used to do. So this country has fallen into a, deep pit. But the parliament does not seem to understand the gravity, or at least the problem the people are facing. And also they don't have the solutions. I would say that is because, now we don't have capable people in parliament. Now I brought the letter, basically Ali Sabri gave.
Yes.
When he resigned from his portfolio as finance minister. He speaks about a person better than him to handle finances. And actually he's also indirectly trying to say, if you don't have anyone in parliament, bring somebody from outside, even do it. Now
Yes,
in
so
19...
Mr. De Silva, we will speak about all of that in depth. I just want to open the floor for questions so that my fellow journalists can also pose questions, and we can broaden this discourse. To my immediate right, this evening we have Niresh Eliathambi, senior journalist, and also to my left we have Sandro Satyajit joining me in questioning our panel of guests on what the people need to know, and also to give them a very clear and accurate prognosis of what is happening in the country. So, Niresh, would you like to take over?
Thank you, Jaihar. So I'd like to address my first question to Bhavani. Bhavani, we're talking about the people's right to know. That's all fine, but are there limitations to this? What should the people not know according to our Constitution, our Right to Information Act, our National Security Act, and so on? What is it that the people, the limitations on their right to know legally?
So Niresh, I think that's a good starting point to understand how things have also changed, because we spoke about the Establishment Code, at least in terms of some of the developments, which in a sense provides a particular power to restrict government officials from expressing or speaking or publishing. Now that was in the 1990s. Since then, several decades later, we now have the Right to Information Act. That came about a few years ago, but that debate in terms of freedom of expression, right to information, has been there for decades. Now, right to information, basically it's a constitutional right now. It's in the Fundamental Rights chapter. There is also freedom of expression in the Fundamental Rights chapter. So the Constitution alone, which is supreme in Sri Lanka, provides for freedom of expression and right to information. These are not absolute rights, but these are fundamental rights. Why is it not absolute? Because there can be restrictions imposed. And those restrictions are provided in the Constitution. There is national security, public health, religious, racial issues. It's clearly stated out in the Constitution. But it also says it has to be by law. So you can't just issue a circular and try to stop someone from expressing an opinion or trying to get information. It has to be by law. Now, a law could be emergency regulations, for example, that could fall as a law. But there is a question whether a minister might say he can issue a regulation, which I would say can be challenged. A circular issued by the Ministry of Health can be challenged. These should be challenged if it's infringing fundamental rights. And some of it has been challenged. Some of these things have been challenged. There's also people who have gone to the Right to Information RTI commission in terms of trying to get information. So the crux of it is that we have evolved in terms of our rights, and in the last few years there is a clear acceptance now that right to information and fundamental rights are fundamental for citizens. Now the Right to Information Act also provides a certain restrictions. That's provided by law. So those restrictions apply. National security, issues around economy, information shared in a professional capacity, medical records, these are also listed. So those restrictions are there. It's clearly set out. And so one can look at what's provided in law and say those are the restrictions in the Constitution and in the law. Anything else that someone just willy-nilly comes and says, but this is a restriction, we can't give you information, can be challenged, should be challenged. And that goes back to my opening remark. People are challenging, people are questioning. When the executive arm, when the president or a secretary or a minister says, oh, it's national security, we can't give this information, people do challenge. And that's why the RTI Commission has a lot of cases and inquiries before them. So I think that's a positive dimension. But the recent circular and even the attempts to bring in particular laws to suppress people's opinion, expression, shows the mindset of a government that's quite happy to take this step of everything is national security, everything is public or law and order, and those can't be shared. So we need to understand where the state or the government comes from, and then understand what's also provided in the Constitution. And never forget, the Constitution is supreme. No one can take away that from us as citizens.
Bhavan, if I can interject real quick now. There was if I may, because you said this has evolved in Sri Lanka as well, the right to information. But if we go back to the Roman Empire, just a quick thing, the Roman Empire was built upon its secrecy and its methods of communication, yeah? And but then the papyrus was intercepted by Egypt because there was a leak in their communications, which led to the eventual descent. Coming to a very modern example, last year with the economic crisis, we saw a certain minister saying there was a shortage of fuel, which led to an artificial increase of supply, which led to basically a flip of the demand and supply chain, which was a part of what led to the economic crisis. Don't you think that in a way, maybe there is a thing called too much information? I mean, of course, Dr. Jayanthi, you can also answer, because you did say that we do have a right to speak. But is there really a limit to the information that should be put out? Looking from the government side, playing a little bit of the devil's advocate here, because of what did happen in the past, with examples as well, do you think there is something called too much information?
Well, can I just come back to your example in terms of what happened last year and the information that was put out? Now, why did that happen? What was the motive? You know, and it's all political. It's benefiting a particular individual or a group of people. And it goes to the heart of the thing where people just said enough of this kind of politics, this kind of governance model, and there has to be political accountability. There has to be greater transparency. So I won't say, I mean, as long as the information is for the public good and the public benefits, I think one basic point we seem to forget sometimes is the government is there for the trust. They hold the trust of the people. They have to act in the public's benefit. They shouldn't be acting in the benefit of a few elites or cronies or those business folk. It's for the people. The people elected them to office. We can question the form of election. We can question whether Parliament is, you know, it's a legal thing, but does Parliament have all? Those are questions we can go into, but they hold government in trust for the people. In that sense, any information that's for the benefit of the people should be out there. Now, any attempts to restrict that, that's why I said, needs to be challenged. And needs to be also, I think, reminded.
So my question
comes there, Bhavani. So what if we do challenge it? What if we do challenge the people's right to know? And what if that turns out in a negative impact to the people, like it was last year?
But then who benefited from that? That's the whole thing is like, I think one needs to look at the whole scenario in terms of the sequence of events, who started that, for what purpose. And I don't think that should be the example to say, well, that went horribly wrong, so we should restrict. And I think that's the problem we can get into. These situations that could be created or manipulated could strengthen the arm of saying we restrict rights, we restrict civil liberties, we have a strong arm government that decides for all of us. So I think the whole notion is, yes, of course the government is there for a particular purpose, but the government also needs to remember, why are they in government? We had a government and a president that was peacefully thrown out of office because they didn't deliver as promised. We don't want to keep going down that path. If the government, if the elected officials do their duty, and I think we'll all agree there's a long way to do that in the present scheme of things, if they do their duty, we won't even have to have these debates. I think for a functioning democracy, freedom of expression, right to information is fundamental. If you start putting restrictions, we go down a very dangerous path.
Dr. Jaihar, do you think your rights are respected, your right to be free in your expression? Do you think it's represented?
Yes.
Do you think else?
Yes, actually, these outdated, traditional, old laws and regulations should be changed, must be changed now. This is a modern society. Right to information is there, and according to this circular, why they have issued this circular? You can think about this. For the health, last year they have allocated 3,022 billion rupees. For the drugs and devices, other purchase to purchase drugs and devices and other equipment, they have allocated around $100 billion. In always during past 20 years, there are a lot of corruptions and irregularities regarding purchasing these things. Last few months, minister has purchased, is a no-link minister, they have purchased a lot of unregistered drugs. Those may be substandard or poor quality drugs.
Not approved by the NMRA.
Yeah. Now some drugs they have proven evidence. Now we have some drugs. Now we have proven evidence. Some are on investigation. But anyway, the minister has violated the NMRA regulations.
And there is proof of this.
Yeah, she has violated. It is clearly said that in the emergency situation, he can purchase drugs, devices, or borderline products. In case of not in a normal situation.
I want to come to that, Doctor, because I was reading an article on a weekend newspaper recently, and they had spoken to the chairman of the NMRA, and he has admitted that some of these contentious drugs were brought after securing a WOR, a waiver of registration, and without proper registration from the NMRA. And he has conceded that the NMRA lacked the capacity to check samples of drugs. So now the drug watchdog here in Sri Lanka, not having any sort of facilities to at least test a sample of a drug that is brought down, and as a result, valuable lives are being lost that wouldn't have even been lost if not for these drugs being administered. Where are we going wrong? What is
actually the WHO, they have introduced a national drug policy. Actually, the founder of the national drug policy is Professor Senagabile. He was from Sri Lanka. He was a very intelligent and very important person. He was, but now according to the WHO, to the Senagabile policy, WHO national drug policy also they have helped. And now the problem is we have no national drug policy for us. Now we have only a NMR Act.
Right.
there are so many things to change. That means in this go to this circular, minister can purchase drugs.
Right.
Minister can allow to purchase drugs. He has a monopoly. Actually it's a monopoly, but they have clearly mentioned in case of emergency only they can purchase drugs.
Right.
Now, but past few months they have purchased drugs, lot of drugs, and I told earlier, the thing is, these are corruptions. These are corruptions. Then we are talking about these issues. Then they want to suppress us. And I was talking about the 100 billion rupees.
Right.
I will tell you example. Last days the heavy market. Can you remember that? If you have saw the news, can you remember there was a drug called heavy marcaine. It's a brand name.
Right.
Its generic name is heavy bupivacaine. It's used for the anesthesia. It's for the local anesthesia to operate below the this back level.
Below the spine, yes.
Yeah,
spinal, the bupivacaine.
Yeah, bupivacaine. Yes. So around 30 to 40% surgeries are done under the spinal anesthesia. This is drugs used for spinal anesthesia.
Yes.
Price of that drugs in Indian original brand is 30 rupees.
Right.
30 Indian rupees. Converting to the Sri Lanka rupees, it's around 120 rupees. This drugs has been purchased from the government for 108 rupees, and now this drug is sought, and some batches has withheld.
Yes.
Then the patients has to bring from the outside pharmacies. Do you know the price? Minimum price is 900, and some pharmacies 900 to 2,500 rupees. This is the corruption.
Who is
We can purchase more than four times of these drugs, I think.
Because I think even this eye drop, the prednisolone acetate, it has been found that it was contaminated by microbug, a certain batch of it.
Yeah, it's a substandard drug, poor quality drugs. We can divide it into two substandard drugs. We can have two categories. One is safety and efficacy.
Right.
Some drugs they has no safety. Some drugs they has no efficacy. Efficacy means
there's no effectiveness.
Effectiveness. Then the recent issues were regarding that
safety concerns.
Safety matters, and we can't measure the efficacy. Minister, one patient death in Panadura hospital, can you remember? Minister told in the news, I heard, he told this death was not related to the drugs. This is because of the cellulitis.
Yes. He had an allergic reaction.
Cellulitis means infection.
Right.
They have given antibiotics. How we know those antibiotics are working? That's the problem.
So, Dr. Jaihar, speaking about Dr. Jayantha's statement and the minister's statement in Parliament responding to allegations, he said that if 100,000 people go into hospital, not all 100,000 return, and that's why there are funeral parlours outside hospitals. Is that a statement that a Minister of Health of a country should be making? Yes, I know it is reality, but is that the sort of sentiment that you should be expressing from Parliament in a chamber in that way?
I agree with you. I mean, it's an unfortunate turn of phrase on the part of the minister. It shows a certain, it's a little bit callous. It's a little bit callous also. However, I have to say this, now the confidence of the
Quite happened, yeah.
I believe we have a
ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරපු සමහර දේශපාලන ප්‍රවාහයන් ආයෙනවා. කලාව නාව. ඒකෙත් කලාවක් තියෙනවා. ඒක කලාව. ඒ මොකක්ද? කොහොමද ඒක කියවන්නේ?
තරුණයෝ ඉල්ලුවේ සිස්ටම් චේන්ජ් එක. ඒක උනේ නෑනේ.
ඒක හදන්න මිනිස්සු ඉන්නව නැත්තේ නෑ. IMF එකෙන් ණය ගත්ත හැකි. ඔව්. ආර්ථික කඩාවැටීම. මේ සංස්කෘතික කඩාවැටීම සිදු වුණාන් පස්සේ අපි කාගෙන්ද ණයට ගන්න කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙනවා.
හරි කරගෙන කාට හරි ගෙයිමක් දීලා කීයක් හරි හොයාගෙන ඉන්න නම් පුරුෂාර්ථය හැදිලා තියෙන ජීවිතේ එතනින් එහාට යගේ හියුමන් ලයිෆ් එකේ ගමනක් නෑනේ.
මිනිස්සු ප්ලෑන් කරපු ජීවිත නැති වෙලා හැමෝටම තමන්ගේ ජීවිතය අහිමි.
ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයේ දරිද්‍රතාවයක් තියෙනවා. Poverty of democracy.
බුද්ධිමය සංවාදය බ්‍රහස්පතින්දා රාත්‍රී 10:30 මාවත.
Do you think if an election is held now, you all will have the same momentum and the traction at an election that is held in the coming few months? Don't you think things have changed now? The dynamics have changed.
I believe we can have the majority and form a government. Why there was a trade deficit? Because we know our export income was drastically going down and the import level was very high by that time.
We as the political party is against government running any kind of business. Health and education has to be provided by the government free.
Saying that certain institutions have to be there with the government, whether it's loss making or profit making.
The loss-making state enterprises, I mean, they really have to be restructured.
There is no hard and fast rule about socialism and capitalism. That is intermingled. Like what we say always, the federalism and the unitary system of government. Both are intermingled.
Face the Nation, Wednesday nights at 9:30 on TV1.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We apologize for that slight technical error. However, we will continue the show now. Dr. Jaihar, I was questioning you about the Minister of Health statement in Parliament and you were giving a very elaborate answer. Please continue.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Minister's use of language was not sensitive and it was unfortunate that he spoke in that manner. I suppose he is also under a lot of pressure because there is a lot of criticism of the health ministry and of himself personally. Now, the issue I think also for the government, however, is that, you know, people's confidence in the health system is very important. Because if they lose confidence in the health system, then where do the people go? So I think the government's decision to try and gag doctors and other medical personnel from speaking freely on this matter stems from that they want to retain some confidence in the health system because people are getting really worried. They don't want to go to the hospital, they don't want to take medicine, and if they don't take the medicine, then I mean they will suffer themselves because from what I can see, it's not all the medicine that is faulty. It's a relatively small samples that have been contaminated. Now the question again is that, you know, people are believing that it is due to corruption that this has happened, that this substandard medicine is being bought. I think Dr. Jayanta will probably be able to also explain this better, but I spoke to some persons in the health system. And one possibility that they suggested is that since we are in this economic crisis, that the government is resorting to also bulk buying.
Right.
Bulk purchasing.
Bulk purchasing, which is not so efficacious, not so safe because it's bulk and not wrapped properly. It can get contaminated relatively easy.
Right.
And also because of the economic crisis, we are also having, you know, the power cuts and various things going wrong. So it is possible that that also has had an impact. But the focus of the criticism of the government and of the minister has been that some corrupt deals are going through. So I think that is also at play here.
Dr. Jayant, I want to pick your brain on the fact that Dr. Jaihar mentioned as well, and also I want to know your personal opinion as a medical professional yourself. Sri Lanka's healthcare system used to be hailed as one of the best in the world, and it's free healthcare. But now, when the minister also fails to give any sort of reassurance to the general public about the effectiveness of our healthcare system, what do you feel?
Good question. Actually, there are 5 models of health systems in the world now.
Right.
This is a recent article. There are 5 models. They have categorized these models according to the who funds and who is giving the service, service delivery service supplier.
Right.
In Sri Lanka, before 2000, it was funded by government, services supplied by delivery by the government hospitals. Now, this has changed. In Sri Lanka now, suppliers, government fund only 40%, around 40 to 45%.
Right.
Other around 50% out of pocket expenditure. You know out of pocket expenditure means that we have to pay for the health day to day, in our day to day pocket, from our pocket.
From our money, yes.
According to WHO, actually in good practice of health finance, there are four categories of countries.
Right.
This is developed countries. These are high income countries, middle income countries, and low income countries.
Right.
In the low, we are a low income country. Our out of pocket expenditure is like this, very high out of. This government expenditure is less.
Low.
And there are 3 categories: government expenditure, out of pocket expenditure, and funds, pool funds, like insurance.
Okay.
In developed countries, according to WHO, WHO have recommended to allocate government expenditure for the health at least more than 70%.
Right.
We have allocated around 40% now. Out of pocket expenditure is going up. Now it's around 50%.
Okay.
My explanation is when the countries are developing, the government portion of to the contribution of the health should be increased.
Right.
Our trend is it is going down. I will show you. This is the out of pocket expenditure. This is our trend. This is a very bad trend. It's going up.
Okay.
According to WHO, the global average of the out of pocket expenditure is 20%.
Okay.
From the total health expenditure.
Yes. Out of pocket.
WHO has recommended do not let to increase the out of pocket expenditure more than 30%. There will be a catastrophic health effect.
Right.
People will be poor because of the health expenditures.
Yes.
But in our countries, it's around 50%.
At present.
Yeah. Now,
so doctor, this sounds like apart from the economic disaster that started a couple of years ago and we had to face last year, and now it continues to go on, and now we are facing a health disaster as well.
Yes. Actually, I want to tell something, some more. We are talking about, we are a developing country. If it is a developing country, these funds, government funds should be increased. That is going down. We are lose everything. We are lost. We are not a developing country. And according to these models, there's one model in the UK. They have a model. They are service provided also government and funds by the government.
Right.
In the American and Canada, it's funds by the government, service delivered by the private sector, private hospitals and private laboratories and private.
Yes.
In America, there's a mix. In other European countries also, some countries like Italy, they have Beverly method. This is called Beverly method. It's funds and deliver by the government. Like India, our model is now, we were in Beverly method. That means we funded and we delivered this health service. Now, we are in out of pocket model.
Right.
That out of pocket, I will tell this. We are in out of pocket model now. This is the kind of model followed in most poor countries. This is no wide public or private systems of health insurance. People mostly pay for the service they receive out of pocket. However, this leaves many underprivileged people without essential health care. Almost all countries with such a system have a much lower life expectancy and high infant mortality rate. The author gives his experience with the system in India and a brief description of the incidence medical system in Ayurveda. I want to tell something else because we have, as a country, we have there are around 100 health indicators that measure the health of a country. WHO has introduced 12 years ago. They have 100 core health indicators. There are so many indicators. We have achieved 3 indicators in 1980. What are the life expectancy at birth and maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate.
Now, Dr. Jaihar, picking up from that, just a quick question, I think, to Mr. Lassell, because I think one of the most important facts that we can draw out from that is the brain drain that has come out, because now, like Mr. Niresh himself mentioned, there is a brain drain that has occurred. There is rather a health crisis that has come about. But with the health crisis, what we've also seen is what has been imminently happening silently beneath all of these crises is the brain drain, including in the health sector, which many doctors themselves say now. Mr. Lassell, now we've noticed that Sri Lanka's only pediatric radiologist left the country just a few weeks ago. And this is just one of the many cases that are being reported in the country where specialists are leaving, well-versed economists, well-versed in everyone, well-versed in any profession rather, is trying to leave the country. This week alone, very personal example, I saw at least 10 people that I know who have left the country, who are very good at what they do. Mr. Lassell, my question to you is, the people's right to know, yes, it's important, but is it because the people's right to know is restricted that people don't know anymore? People don't even know what their next step is because the government is inconclusive in what they do to even tell the general public what they do. Are people leaving the country because they don't know, because the government doesn't inform us of what they are doing?
Now, she was also speaking, Bhavani, you know, there are certain restrictions. Yes, there are certain restrictions, but we should remember always, they are elected, they are sent there by us. And it says, you know, even in books, we the people, we the government. We have all the right to know everything what happens. They can't hide anything at all, right? And he asked a very good question, whether education has a role. Now, in 1931, we got voting rights. Actually, C.W.W. Kandankara has said on all occasions, wherever, in all various places, that the education is the must, is very important, right? Unless you educate the masses, there is no democracy. And there can be autocracy, there can be all kinds of mobocracy, which is right now, right? So, take you back even further. In America, there was a war with British in 1776 and they introduced a constitution. Now, having introduced the constitution, right, they saw to it education is provided by the government and right to information, you know, all that. Say there were about 10 amendments within about 10 years. First one was freedom of expression, like that, you know, all those human rights, all that, right? So actually human rights, of course, in detail was taken in after the Second World War. So what I'm trying to say, right to information is a basic thing, and at the same time, education, you know, also is information, in the sense knowledge, to build up a knowledge society. So all that was done from 1931, and let me also quote, that's what C.W.W. Kandankara had said, in 1901 there had been school-going children 650,000 only, from whatever, right? Only 1/4 of the population has got education. So he had said it is very important to educate the masses, and he was a statesman of that caliber. And he never wanted to sort of restrict education to the Sinhala community or whatever. He said every 2 miles a primary school, every 5 miles Mahavidyalaya, then selected townships, Madhya Mahavidyalayas, right, central colleges. So eventually, when it came to 60s, actually in 1948 when we got independence, ours was a democracy. They said, what is this? They said three things. The oldest democracy, it was in Asia, right? Oldest democracy, and really there were three things they said. I forget, right? Yes. So it's very important to remember that was the country that we had, right? So for that matter, all what these people should have done was to take it further up, right? Now in America, there was a system under Trump. They restricted certain information, and they even used very low methods to get information, like waterboarding and all that, right? So there was a lady who said this is not proper. It's a constitutional democracy, people have all the rights. And first they refused, but ultimately they had to give all those information. The government can't restrict information. They can restrict, like what Bhavani said, only a limited during a war or whatever, right? So we have all the right to know everything, except for those whatever, right?
So Bhavani, Mr. Lasil brought up a good point. He said those in parliament are elected, and they are elected by the people. But even at present, we have members of parliament who have raised their hands for
to tell
multiple constitutional amendments, and those people were also voted in by the people. Shouldn't our people have known better? If they do have full right to information, and if they are aware of what their policymakers and their leaders are doing, when they were at the polling station, shouldn't they have thought better? Would Sri Lanka be in this crisis if we had thought a bit more extensively when we were voting?
Yeah, and the responsibility is also with the people. I think we can't just blame elected officials, bureaucrats and others for this crisis. I think those who elected particularly individuals also need to really reckon as to their decision making. But it also goes back to how information is given to people. You know, in 2019, with the presidential election, the narrative at that time was, we need a strong leader. The narrative was
national security. Fear, suspicion really engulfed people.
True. I think it's worth looking at who drove that narrative. What were the drivers, and the impact was, and a particular individual was with a thumping majority elected to office, with of course the promise of national security, economy, everything. Now we went the other way in a way if you look at what happened in 2020 and 2021, but it's so people also rely on what's out there, and their decision making can be informed by particular individuals, particular entities. So I think there's a role for citizens to understand, to question, to critique, to be vigilant, but also for media entities, for other stakeholders to also be a responsible actor. And I think that's something we need to also have a conversation about, the different actors.
Quick question to you to add on to that, just with that. Do you think Sri Lankan people are used to questioning things with the culture that we have grown up with? Because as representing the youth also here, a lot of youth take things as they are at face value. But not all of it, of course. People do challenge and go out of it. But then do you think Sri Lanka has a background of questioning the information we have, especially the masses in rural Sri Lanka, which account for most of the population?
So I think there are certain sections who will always question, who will get to the streets, who will challenge, but I would say majority are rather complacent, at least up till last year. And that was why last year was remarkable. It wasn't the middle class alone who came to the streets. It was all sections of society, age groups, ethnicities, religions. And the protest started small. I mean, lots of people will talk about the Colombo protest, but you have to go back to what happened with the fertilizer ban and the teacher protest, the trade union protest. That started in 2021. 2022 was a mass-scale protest. And also, let's not forget the protests that happened over the decades, you know, the mothers of the disappeared, the P2P protests that happened in the north and from the east to the north, you know, that also started under the Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime, where no one was seen really challenging. Tamil and Muslim communities came together and showed a protest can make a difference. So I would say a lot, there is complacency, but I think there is a greater awareness and activism. And I'll just also say, over the years, over the decades, even people who file cases, there were very few filing cases. Very few of us were in court challenging some of these unpopular decisions, constitution amendments, bills. There's a lot more coming to courts and challenging. I think that's quite heartening, that people find different tools in challenging, and the use of social media, you know, I mean, we had a chat before in terms of young people, their attention span may be very short, but, you know, there are creative ways of challenging as well. So I think we need to recognize it's a changing demographic, it's also a changing way of challenging. Not everyone will get to the streets, but there are different ways of challenging. But it's also the fact that there are different tactics used by the government that's also deeply problematic, that needs to be also challenged.
Now, Dr. Jaihar, let me ask you this. In a system which is corrupt or mismanaged, the public relies very heavily on whistleblowers, and that is something which in developed nations is quite enshrined in the law. You need somebody from within a department, a corporation, whatever, to speak up, perhaps anonymously, perhaps publicly. What do you think this sort of circular does psychologically to people who want to speak up when they see a crisis happening, such as in the health sector today?
Yeah, it will definitely deter most of them, because they would not want to get into trouble with the government service and maybe even lose their jobs. I think it has already happened to one doctor who made a certain assertion about malnutrition, and I think problem was he looked at a very local situation and then generalized it to the whole country. But he was feeling very strongly, and where malnutrition is concerned, there is a lot of evidence that there is a lot of malnutrition increase. People are not having enough to eat. It's quite plain to see that incomes have remained the same over the last 2 years, but prices have doubled. So then obviously people who are living on the margin will be finding it very difficult to survive. In addition to the whistleblower, the health ministry gag order, even the this anti-corruption law that has recently been passed, that also has a restriction on whistleblowing, because it says that those who make complaints can actually be taken to court themselves, can be charged, and then they'll be punished. So naturally people will be frightened, because to whistleblow.
So that
because they'll be frightened that they'll get that they'll be penalized. They will accuse someone of corruption who may be corrupt, but then because the whole system is stacked against a person who's not so rich and who has made an allegation, and he won't be able to hire such a good lawyer, and the system can be rigged against him, then he'll be deterred from coming out. So yes, there is a certain within this government system, it's very controlling, and it's tilting the power towards the rulers rather than to the people, so that the people will have more difficulty holding the leaders to account, which they should be able to do.
I noticed you use the word rulers interchangeably with leaders, and I think in our system it should be leaders or government servants of the people, and certainly we don't have rulers.
Yeah, we are heading towards a more sort of authoritarian type of system without, without elections. We have to be very watchful about that the right to vote is preserved and not taken away for various good reasons. Stability and but that leads to corruption and dictatorship.
Well, let's clarify that we have the right to vote, we just don't have elections.
Yes.
Bhavani, I want to...
brain drain.
Go ahead. Yes.
It's a very big issue in health sector now. A lot of healthcare workers, doctors, specialist doctors and nurses and other staff have leave the country. And another lot is waiting to leave. Now, healthcare workers' workload is very high. We can't tolerate actually now. Then, the most of the people leave the country because of healthcare professionals get very poor salary and very low payments, and they have faced very lot of financial difficulties and high taxes and lack of job satisfaction. Overall job satisfaction is very poor now. And now these days there's a crisis in the health. We have to most of the people understand this crisis or these issues are arising from the healthcare frontline workers. They have conflict with people and the healthcare frontliners. This is a big issue. Then those lot of healthcare workers has no protection now. And another issue, there are children's education. Education is a crisis now. But in the world, some countries, we have good demand for our healthcare workers has a demand in the world. Then this natural migration is natural now. There's our condition is, our environment is not favorable.
Yes.
They can migrate.
Right. Mr. Lassil, I want to continue the conversation on brain drain, just to give a bit of context to our viewers and also some figures. According to the Bureau of Foreign Employment, in 2021, 8,373 professionals had left the country and 40,000 skilled workers had left the country. But in 2022, 14,307 professionals, almost twofold, have left the country, and 92,836 skilled workers have left the country. So professionals would be doctors, engineers and so on, and skilled workers would be laborers, for example. So Sri Lanka has a vision now of Vision 2030 that the President has put forth. But at this rate, will there be enough human capital for us to at least go to Vision 2030?
Very good question. Now, in 2015, it's a very good question, Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe said a developed country in 60 months. Now, I like to ask you, he had completed the 60 months. Do you see that? No. This has been going on for a long period of time. They have been in power, alternatively. Now, the worst period, even in the 60s, there was this issue of brain drain. None of these people addressed those issues, right? Because basically they were not really interested in running good governance.
I believe he said a developed nation by 2048.
No, that's now. This is this time. Last time in 2015 specifically said in 60 months.
Yes.
Right? And I take the responsibility. I don't want to put, say, this is the type of system that continue. Now, even like what Bhavani said, now GOTA, there was a, kind of, say, picture created that you need a Hitler or you need a strong leader. Basically, the system that was there was totally broken down, I would say. Eventually, the system they have created is a system that suits them, not the people, right? It's not people friendly. It doesn't really, even the services like what Jaihar said. Basically, now the medical, our country, our standards, whatever it is, illiteracy, all that, was comparable with even developed countries. So, brain drain has become a problem because the governments actually did not govern properly. So, if you see even in the future, but actually if you have a set of good people, probably we have a duty to ensure that set of good people are.
So I want to draw parallels with what you said in the 70s and the 80s, comparatively in Parliament and the policymakers in Parliament, and what Dr. Jaihar also said about the callous statement by the minister.
It's very wrong. You can't use Parliament for that kind of statements. You just can't, right? Parliament can't be lowered to the level what we see now. There are privilege issues there because we also have privileges, right? They have not done justice to the people. They have not delivered what they have promised. Really, they have gone back on what they had said. Actually, they don't walk the talk really for that, but even now, looking at the big picture, not only brain drain, you all have no future now. The biggest problem is to ensure, even with the remaining whoever, right? Now, the youth came out for what? I like to say now, even in the past, our society was quite intelligent and they raised all the issues and questioned. That's why 1971 insurrection. That's why even LTT took up arms because they were not delivering the goods. And 89 again, right? They crushed all those things using mighty force. That's not the way to do it. Even this time when Aragalaya was in, they never addressed the problems even to date. Even to date, they have not addressed issues. So what I'm trying to say, ours is a democracy. They can't just change that, right? Ours is let me quote that from the Constitution, that will be better. Now, right, they have to, people are grateful, remembering them, struggle to regain and preserve their rights and privileges so that the dignity and freedom of the individual may be assured, just social, economic and cultural order attained, and unity of the country restored. Then do hereby adopt and enact this constitution as the supreme law of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka.
Just a question out of curiosity.
Please.
The constitution, Nasir, when a new MP is elected, is he obliged to read the constitution before coming to Parliament?
That's a very good question again. Actually, the political culture is such. Now, she also said we vote, right? Who else do you have to vote? I mean, they have the same lot. Every term after term, every election, you have the same faces. This system needs to be changed. Unless you change that system, now see, they don't produce leaders. Actually, if they don't produce leaders, they are not leaders. My way of looking at it, right? We are running short of political leaders. Might even have to import from America or Singapore or wherever to put the country right. And I think there are people who could do that. All what I want to say here, being a democratic country, actually now, over a period of time, they have craftily taken over the whole thing, and actually now it's a captured state. It's a captured state, right?
As of course, I think parliamentarians falling asleep during sessions. Of course, maybe they are very tired, after all their hard work during the day.
If they had done hard work, we would...
Sleeping on the job. Sleeping on the job.
Yeah, of course. Dr. Jaihar, a quick question to you. I think we're nearing the end of the show. But before that, when it comes to the entire work of things now, Sri Lanka has become the worst performing currency in Asia, just by being the best in the first part of this year, if I'm not mistaken. Now the government is losing confidence in, the people are losing confidence in the government. The government is restricting the people's right to know. People are leaving the country as a result of this, and those who are in the country, especially in rural Sri Lanka, are suffering very devastatingly because of this. Are we seeing Sri Lanka led to anarchy in the next 1 to 2 years in the short term? My question to you, Dr. Jaihar, do you see Sri Lanka going into anarchy? Will the dollar even rise to 1,000 rupees and further destroy the economy? What do you see for the future of Sri Lanka?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a soothsayer. The options are open. The possibilities are there of economic collapse. I'm hopeful that will not happen. It does not have to happen. I think on the positive side, we do have a president who has a lot of experience, and he has a certain vision, and he's willing to take that vision. We see that with the economy. He is doing unpopular things, but which he believes is good in the long term. And those things he's getting the support of the parliament. Unfortunately, a parliament that has been rejected by the people, but he is working with them to do that. My hope is that he will also address the other main issue in our country, the division in the family, the division between the ethnicities, the religions. He has the vision again, but he has to take the lead and do that. And last point, he has to deal with the problem of corruption. This government can't go this way with a parliament, a set of ministers who are believed to be corrupt by our people. Something that has to change. And if that changes, I believe the country itself has the resources, the talents still remaining in it to surmount all these difficulties. And we will also probably be able to access more international assistance from countries that have a lot of goodwill towards Sri Lanka. That is what I hope.
Dr. Jaihar, one final question to you tonight from me. Do you think a president who has a track record as he does, being a prime minister numerous times, having had the power to make this change, can be trusted with the power, can be trusted with the belief that he will change and make this decision now when Sri Lanka needs it the most? Yes or no?
Well, it has to remain. In the past, he did not have the full power. We can argue about it. He could have done more, and he can do more even now. He needs support from people of goodwill, and he has to show goodwill himself. And ideally, he should not be thinking about his next election. He should not make decisions today based on trying to win in the future. He should do the right thing now. He has 1 year to do it. That's my hope again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaihar Perera, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. We are nearing the end of the show, unfortunately, and with that we move to the final phase or segment of the show for the closing remarks from our guest panel. I invite Dr. Lasil De Silva.
No, I'm not the doctor.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Lasil De Silva, former Director, Administration of Parliament, to present his closing.
You know, I wanted to tell one more thing. Now, with regard to information, right? Why do they have shut the doors with regard to the assets declaration of MPs? Right? We have all the right to know how much they have at the moment, and also how much they had when they entered Parliament, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, or 10 years, 15 years ago, right? This is totally undemocratic, and that kind of laws need to be amended, and they have used Parliament to protect themselves. I will give you a list of items, laws, where they have taken similar precautions, right? Because even with regard to corruption, 1994, Act number 19, the creation of what is this bribery commission, CBOC, right? GLP is at the final stage, summing up the debate, said from tomorrow there will be a new country, right? They all promised all the kind of things, but it has never happened. Why is this? Why is this? There is so much that needs to be done. Now, he asked the question whether the president, right, all of them had the opportunities. Now, the parliament has been given all the kinds of facilities, all that, right? They have been given all the perks and benefits. For what? To take the country forward. Unfortunately, that's a heavy burden. Now, I would like to end up again. Now, I had that details also. Actually, our parliament is too heavy. That's one problem. Compared to other countries, now China, now that you have for 22 million, 225, right? If we had similar 1.3 billion, then in our country, in their country, they should have, they have now at the moment 2,987 members in China, right? That's a executive committee or whatever, right? And if the same ratio is adopted, there should be 15,322. Now, India nearly 1.4 billion, very rapid population growth, and they'll be more than China now, right? Now, they have 545. Actually, here, if that is the case, they should have, with that population, 14,433. Now, there's a list again. Now, even in our system, I want to say, now look at the perks, benefits, all that they have been given. Another thing, first President George Washington said, people are watching, looking at me, what I am doing. And he said, I need to be cautious because they are watching what I am doing. And that was in 1787, right? And he says, he had said, he had given every Tuesday at 3 p.m. to meet for 1 hour. You could go and talk to the president, right? Actually, that is what representation in that way, to hear the views of people and give them a hearing and then take action, right? Those facilities are not there. I'm taking you all in a different direction, right? If it is a democracy, what I want to say is all those needs to be given. One more important thing, basically we talked about policies and all that, right? Now there are gazettes and all that they have published on policies. Now this is a gazette with regard to National Energy Policy and Strategies of Sri Lanka, gazette dated 1553 of 10, dated 10th June 2008. This is about National Energy Policy and Strategies of Sri Lanka. I have a few more similar policies of different areas, right? Unfortunately, none of those have been implemented. Those policies have been decided. So this is the problem in this country. I want you all to address actually the basic issues affecting, what really are the problems, why we can't move forward. The biggest problem is Parliament does not do the job that they have been entrusted with.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Dasil De Silva, former Director Administration of Parliament. I now move on to Attorney Bhavani Fonseca, Senior Researcher, Centre for Policy Alternatives.
Well, today's discussion I think is not new, but I think it's a reminder, just listening to our colleague here about the health sector, as to how far we've gone and the collapse we're facing. And I think it's a good question to also ask in terms of budget allocations. You know, in Sri Lanka, 14 years after the war, defense budget is still the highest. Health is much later. And the kind of priorities that this country has, you know, if we to address socioeconomic indices and this crisis, one needs to really ask some tough questions. Who's making the decisions? What's driving them to make the decisions? And who are kind of the influencers in those decision making? And I think this whole point about the government is a trustee for the public. That saying about government of the people, by the people, for the people, that's forgotten by many, because I think there's a lot of vested interests that want to make a quick buck and enrich themselves. It's their personal interest. So, we need to keep challenging those notions. And coming back to what happened last year and what we're seeing now is people are not just staying back and saying, okay, let that happen. Whatever happens, we'll just stand by and see it happen. So there's greater accountability that's being asked. And the question is, after all this, has there been real accountability for what happened for the crisis on the economic crimes, but also past violations, human rights? The impunity thrives in Sri Lanka. That is the culture we are in. If we are not going to address those, we're going to keep repeating these things. So finally, to just end here, is that for citizens, what we saw last year, what we're seeing now is heartening, that people are becoming much more active, much more aware. And I think, it's important to realize that democracy, liberty, rule of law all comes at a price. So this thing about the eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, I think captures what we are in this situation. We all have a role. We all have to do our part. We can't wait for one person or another entity to do it. We all have to do it. And I'm grateful in a way that you keep inviting us to have these difficult conversations, because I think people also need to know the problems but also possible solutions, and not to repeat. Beat another election cycle, let's not fall into the same trap of the narratives. So I think that eternal vigilance is important, eternal scrutiny, and continuously asking those questions.
Right, thank you very much, Bhavani. Dr. Jaihar Bandara, General Secretary, All Ceylon Medical Officers Association.
Thank you again for this opportunity. You talk about the human capital. I would like to tell something about that. Human capital is, there are two things, healthy and educated people. Then how people's level of health is going down because of the crisis of the health. There should be do immediate measures to improve our health system. We suggest we should establish a good, well-equipped laboratory to National Drug Quality Assurance Laboratory.
Yes.
Immediately that should be established. And second thing, we have not, government has not allocated enough money, enough funds. Funds should be increased, and the government or health ministry should stop the corruptions. There are so a lot of money wasting during corruptions and some other things wasting, and we don't know what happened to those funds. And there's a huge crisis in this brain drain. It's a big issue. We have to stop. Stop means we can't stop by force. We have to do something to reduce this brain drain. It should be do immediately. Otherwise, it will be a mess. It's a very dangerous situation in the health sector. Other thing is, the government is trying to privatize, put private votes in the government sector. We are not allowed to do this. This should not be done. I explained earlier, and we are talking about these issues. The government want to suppress us means trade union leaders and other persons who are talking about these issues.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaihar Bandara. And finally, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I'd like to end by citing Bhavani. Bhavani spoke about the ethos of the leaders of this country, the politicians, that they should be trustees. Now, that is something in our tradition. Our Mahavamsa starts with that story of Arhat Mahinda telling the king, you are the trustee only of this land. But what do we see today? It's a violation. When the debt restructuring took place, what happened? The bank shares all went up. People were jubilant, the rich people were all jubilant. Taken from the debt restructuring, the price paid by the pension funds of the poor people, whose pensions have already, the pension funds have lost half their value because of this massive inflation, and now putting this artificial ceiling. That's not the only tragic thing. Then there is also this issue of reparations for the war. According to government policy, a person who died, a family of people who died during the war are entitled to 200,000 rupees for a dead person. 200,000 rupees for a house that was lost during the war. But that same kind of law is being used to compensate those who lost in the Aragalaya, who lost their house in the Aragalaya. Millions of rupees, 60 million rupees, 100 million rupees. And the 200,000 rupees to the war victims not being paid, no money. But there is money to compensate these people who lost their houses. That is a violation of the trusteeship principle. I think we in civil society, though, my belief is we should support government when it does good things. We should oppose it when it does bad things. And I would ask the opposition to do the same. Now, the President has called for an all-party conference on the ethnic issue and a political solution. Regrettably, some of the opposition parties are not taking part. They are saying, we know in advance that this government is doing it for cosmetic reasons. No, you must give the government a chance, hold the government to account. I'm glad that the leader of the opposition has agreed to join. The main opposition party is there. It's very important that they be there. And they should go in with an open mind. Open mind to support the government if it is doing the right thing. Even if it benefits the government, it's going to benefit the country if we can solve this problem. And also oppose the government if it is doing it for petty political reasons. And again, I also want to join Bhavani in thanking you for giving us this opportunity to speak here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaihar Pereira, and that brings us to the close of tonight's Face the Nation program. I wish to thank our panelists once more for coming here and sharing your expert views from your particular fields of expertise. I also want to thank Niresh and Sandro for joining me in picking the brains of our panelists tonight. I will leave you tonight, our viewers, with a quote from the late, great Nelson Mandela. He says, "An educated, enlightened and informed population is one of the surest ways of promoting the health of a democracy." Thank you for joining. Take care and good night.